The night Clara Aldous, née Holt, learned what her husband truly thought of her, there was no raised voice, no slammed door, no dramatic confrontation in a candlelit drawing room. There was only a corridor at Stratton House, a half-open study door, and her own hand pressed flat against the cold plaster wall to keep herself upright while her husband poured wine for his mother and spoke her ruin with the comfortable ease of a man who had planned it carefully. She had come downstairs in her dressing gown to ask him a simple question: what the collapse of her father's firm meant for them, for Cecily, for the life she had spent 7 years building in good faith inside his name. She had not even reached the door when she heard his voice, warm and satisfied, carrying clearly through the gap, and something in the quality of that warmth stopped her feet before her mind caught up with why. She stood very still. She listened, and she understood. In the space of 2 minutes of conversation, she was never meant to hear that her marriage had never been what she believed it was. Crispin's voice came through the gap with the unhurried confidence of a man among allies. "Every pound of her settlement is in the estate," he was saying, and Clara heard the soft pour of wine, the small clink of glass meeting glass. Moved before the Holt firm could fail. It's done. The solicitors managed it cleanly. Lady Honoria's voice followed, low, pleased, the particular satisfaction of a woman who has watched a plan conclude. "And Josiah himself?" "Gone," Crispin said, which removes the last embarrassing trade connection. No more Liverpool merchants at the dinner table. No more explaining her origins to people who matter. A pause, then, "And the girl herself?" "The country estate by the end of the week," Crispin said. Quietly, "I'll send word to Mrs. Aldous at Fenwick that she's coming. She can take the child with her. She's attached to the thing. It will keep her occupied." Clara looked down at her left hand. The wedding ring caught the thin light from the corridor lamp. A band of gold, still warm from her skin, as though it had absorbed 7 years of her body's heat and held it. She had worn it with something she once believed was pride. She did not gasp. She did not make a sound. She turned from the door and walked back down the corridor toward the stairs. And the only thing she took note of in that whole long walk was that her feet made no noise on the carpet, and that the house was very quiet, and that somewhere above her, in the nursery, Cecily was sleeping. She climbed the stairs. She went first to the nursery, stood in the doorway long enough to watch the child's chest rise and fall in the lamplight. 6 years old, dark-haired, her dead sister's daughter. And then she went to her own room and opened the wardrobe. She did not weep, did not. She was not, in that moment, a woman who wept. She was her father's daughter, raised in a counting house on the Liverpool docks, taught to read a ledger before she could read a novel. And what her father had given her, among other things, was the understanding that grief is a thing you put down when you need your hands for something else. She packed one trunk. She chose carefully. The documents in the leather case her father's solicitor had sent after the funeral. She had not yet opened the sealed inner letter, held back by instruction until 30 days had passed. The small amount of coin she kept in her own keeping, the jewelry that had been her mother's and was therefore hers in law, regardless of what the settlement said, and 3 changes of clothes. She packed a separate bag for Cecily. Then she woke Cecily's maid, a young Shropshire woman named Emmeline, who had come with them from the Holt household, and whose loyalty Clara had never had occasion to test until now. "Emmeline," Clara said, keeping her voice low and even, "I need you to dress Cecily warmly and bring her downstairs without waking the rest of the household. We are leaving tonight." Emmeline looked at her face and asked no questions. This, Clara thought, was worth noting. By the time the household maid stirred at 4:30, the three of them were in the street. Clara hailed a night coach with the directness of a woman who had grown up watching her father manage difficult situations. And she did not look back at Stratton House as the coach pulled away into the dark. On the crossing to Calais, with Cecily asleep against her shoulder and Emmeline dozing across the narrow cabin, Clara broke the seal on her father's last letter. The packet moved beneath her, the channel gray and restless in the pre-dawn, and she read his handwriting, large, unsteady in his final illness, but precise where it needed to be. By the swinging light of the cabin lamp. Clara, he had written, if you are reading this, the firm has failed and I am gone, and you are in need of something to stand on. I did not leave you nothing. I left you something your husband cannot touch, because I was careful to put it where English law does not reach. There is a man in Paris, Laurent Mercier, Banque Mercier, Rue Saint-Honoré. He holds a deed in your name, a controlling stake in a Lyons silk house, under French law, vested in you alone. I should have told you sooner. I thought there would be more time. Go to Paris, Clara. Go to Mercier. Build something. You know how. You always knew how, even when you were made to pretend otherwise. Your father. Clara read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it back into the leather case, and traced the name Mercier with her fingertip against the cover of the case, until she had it fixed in her memory as firmly as a figure in a column of accounts. The gray coast of France was beginning to show through the porthole. Cecily stirred against her shoulder, murmured something without waking, and settled again. Clara put her arm more firmly around the child and watched the dawn come up over Calais, pale gold and cold, and entirely indifferent to the fact that her old life had ended somewhere in the middle of the night, and that whatever came next was hers to make. Laurent Mercier received her without an appointment, which surprised his clerk and did not surprise Laurent himself, because Josiah Holt had written him a letter 6 months before his death, describing his daughter in terms that made an unannounced arrival, in a state of gray exhaustion, entirely consistent with the portrait. She came in from the Rue Saint-Honoré on a Tuesday morning, a child of 6 behind her, wearing a traveling dress that had been elegant 36 hours ago. And she walked to his desk with the posture of a woman who had decided, somewhere on the Channel crossing, that she would not, under any circumstances, let this man see how frightened she was. Monsieur Mercier, she said, I am Clara Aldous. My father was Josiah Holt. I believe you are holding something that belongs to me. Laurent looked at her for a moment, the set of her jaw, the rings of exhaustion beneath her eyes, the small hand the child had wrapped around 2 of her fingers. And then he opened the lower drawer of his desk and produced the deed. He slid it across the desk toward her. She reached for it, and their hands met on the paper, his steadying the document against a draft from the open window, hers arriving at the same moment. And he felt the trembling she was working to conceal, a fine tremor in her fingers that her face did not admit to. He held her wrist a beat longer than was strictly necessary, and he was aware that he did so, and he was aware that she noticed the ring on her finger at the same moment he did, because her eyes went there briefly before returning to the document. He explained what the deed represented. A controlling stake in the Maison Blanchard, one of the 3 principal weaving houses in Lyons, worth, at current valuation, a figure that made her go very still for a moment. He explained the protections of French law, the inaccessibility of the stake to English coverture, the specific legal architecture Josiah Holt had constructed to ensure that no English husband could reach it. She listened without interruption, which he appreciated. When he finished, she asked him one question. "Can I build with it?" she said. "Not simply survive, build." Expand the trade, bring lion silk to new markets, establish a house under my father's name. Can I do that on French soil with this as my foundation? Laurent considered her for a moment. He had spent 20 years in the company of people who asked him whether they could afford to survive. He could not immediately recall the last time someone had walked into his bank gray with exhaustion, a child in tow, and asked him whether they could afford to build. He answered simply, "Yes." "Then I intend to," Clara said. "I would like you to act as my legal agent in Paris, Monsieur Mercier. I need someone who knows French commercial law and who cannot be reached by an English viscount's solicitors." Laurent agreed before she had finished the sentence, which surprised him. He was not, by habit or by inclination, a man who agreed to things before they were fully stated. He thought about this later that evening, sitting at his private ledger, the one he kept in his own hand, separate from the bank's official records. And he wrote, in the margin beside the date, "C.A. Ni Holt," agreed before she finished asking, "Note this." He was not entirely certain what he was noting it for, but he wrote it down. Paris came into spring the way Paris always did, abruptly, extravagantly, as though the city had been saving itself. Clara moved into rooms above a half-empty warehouse on the Rue de Richelieu and began working. She visited the Lyon weaving houses in the first week, traveling by diligence with a letter of introduction Laurent had drafted for her. And she did not introduce herself as the Viscountess Stratton. She introduced herself as Clara Holt, daughter of Josiah Holt of Liverpool, and the weavers of Lyon, who had dealt with her father for 15 years and knew his eye for quality. Received her with the particular respect reserved for people who understand what they are looking at. She came back to Paris with 3 provisional agreements and a clearer sense of what the warehouse could hold. Laurent came on Tuesdays and Fridays on bank business. He also came on Wednesdays and sometimes Thursdays, and the stated reason for these visits grew progressively less specific as the weeks passed. They argued on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of April, standing among the first bolts of Lyon silk that had arrived at the Rue de Richelieu, the warehouse smelling of raw fiber and beeswax polish from the new shelving. "I want to commit the full stake to an immediate shipment," Clara told him. She had the figures written out on a sheet of paper, and she put it on the work table between them. 3 Lyon houses, 1 large order, delivered to English buyers in Paris and London simultaneously. The profit margin is here. You can see it. Laurent looked at the figures. He did not dispute them. "The margin is accurate," he said. "The timing is not. A single large order to buyers who do not yet know you is how you lose the stake in 6 months instead of building it over 6 years. My father built his entire Liverpool operation on 1 large early wager," Clara said. "I know," Laurent said. "I also know what happened to your father's operation." The silence that followed was not comfortable. Clara looked at him steadily. "That is not a fair comparison," she said. "No," Laurent agreed. "It is not. But the principle holds. I lost a venture to exactly this logic. Too much, too soon, without the foundation of established relationships. I will not watch it happen again." He paused. "Staged investment. 2 houses, not 3. Smaller initial orders. Building trust with the buyers before you commit the full stake. Give it until autumn." "That is your caution speaking," Clara said. "Not the figures." "Yes," Laurent said. "It is. My caution has kept this bank alive for 14 years. They looked at each other across the work table. Clara picked up the sheet of figures, considered it for a moment, and then set it down again. 2 houses, she said, until autumn. But I am choosing which 2. Laurent gave a single nod. Agreed. English Paris had begun to whisper by the end of April. Clara was aware of it. The slight coolness that entered the manner of acquaintances she met at the English booksellers on the Rue de Rivoli. The careful way certain women declined her invitations. A viscountess running a trade house. No husband visible. A child of uncertain parentage in the rooms above a warehouse. The whispers were not surprising. She had expected them. What she had not expected was the Aldous agent at the warehouse door on a gray Tuesday morning. A dry, careful man in a black coat who handed her a letter and waited while she read it. The letter informed her, in the language of English law, that as a married woman under coverture, she held no independent right to manage assets. That her husband claimed all property and income arising from any French commercial venture, and that she was required to return to England and place herself under Lord Stratton's authority within 30 days or face legal proceedings. Clara read it at the work table, set it face down on a bolt of Lyons silk, and called Laurent's name. He was in the back of the warehouse examining the new shelving with the carpenter. "I need your solicitor," she said when he appeared, "to draft a response in French law explaining precisely why this document has no force on French soil and what the penalties are for attempting to seize French-registered assets belonging to a French-registered company." She kept her voice level. "Today, if possible." Laurent took the letter, read it, and went to find his solicitor. The response was filed by Thursday. The second writ arrived on Friday, in the street. Clara was walking to the warehouse from the baker's on the corner, carrying a paper-wrapped loaf and a small bag of coffee, when the Aldous agent stepped out of a doorway and blocked her path. He raised his voice to serve the document, not shouting, but loud enough that the two women at the milliner's across the street turned to look. And Clara stood very still, in the spring rain, and looked at him without expression. Laurent came around the corner from the direction of the bank at that moment. He took in the scene in a single glance. The agent, the raised voice, Clara standing in the rain with her bread and her coffee and her absolute stillness. And he walked directly to them, took the document from the agent's extended hand before the man could finish speaking, and turned to Clara. He said only, "Come." He walked her on. His coat settled over her shoulders. She had not seen him remove it. But there it was, warm from his body, smelling of cedar and ink. And he said nothing more. And she said nothing more. And neither of them mentioned it for the rest of the day. The warehouse filled through May. The two lion houses Clara had chosen, Blanchard and a smaller house named Valette, whose chief weaver had known her father personally. Delivered on time and above specification. And the first English buyers who came to the Rue de Richelieu were a pair of London drapers who had been doing business in Paris for 20 years and who knew quality when it was laid in front of them. Two other English buyers did not take her seriously. One of them addressed his questions to Laurent rather than to Clara, despite the fact that Laurent was standing 3 paces behind her. Clara answered the questions herself in exact technical terms, and watched the man's expression shift from condescension to attention without acknowledging the shift. The other buyer asked her, with transparent curiosity, whether her husband was involved in the venture. "No," Clara said. "He is not." The buyer waited, evidently expecting elaboration. Clara offered none and turned to show him the Valette samples. Late one evening, in the second week of May, after the warehouse had emptied of the day's business, Laurent stayed to help her sort a new consignment by quality, a task that required bringing each bolt to the lamp to examine the weave in direct light. The warehouse was quiet. Cecily was upstairs with Emmeline. The only sounds were the rain against the high windows and the soft movement of silk against the sorting table. Clara was holding a length of Blanchard silk at arm's length, trying to catch the lamp at the correct angle, when Laurent stepped behind her shoulder and closed his hand over hers, redirecting the angle of the bolt toward the light with a small, precise adjustment. Neither of them moved their hands. The lamp threw the weave into sharp relief, 40 threads to the inch, consistent and clean. And they both looked at it for a moment, and then Clara said, "Good. That is first quality." And Laurent released her hand and stepped back to the table, and neither of them said anything about what had just happened. He began arriving at the warehouse without a stated reason. He stayed later each time. Clara noticed this with the precision she applied to everything. And on a Thursday evening in late May, while they were reviewing the Lion accounts at the work table, she looked up from the ledger and asked him directly. "You are a cautious man," she said. "You have a bank to run and clients to manage, and a reputation built over 14 years. Why are you spending your evenings in a silk warehouse?" Laurent looked at the ledger for a moment. Then he said, "The accounts require attention." "The accounts," Clara said, "required 40 minutes. You have been here for 3 hours." He did not answer immediately. When he did, he said, "The warehouse has good light in the evenings." Clara looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who has said something technically true and knows it is not sufficient. She did not press. She registered the deflection and set it beside the coat in the rain and the hand over hers at the lamp, and she returned to the ledger. But the atmosphere between them had changed, the way a room changes when a window is opened, not dramatically, not suddenly, but definitively, so that the air is different and everyone in the room is aware of it. She was still wearing the ring. She looked at it sometimes, late in the evenings, and thought about what it meant and what it no longer meant. And she did not remove it because in law she was still Crispin's wife, and removing it would change nothing about that fact. Laurent had not asked her to. He looked at it sometimes, the way she looked at it, briefly, without comment, and whatever he thought about it, he kept to himself. The warehouse had fewer formal silences now. There was more sustained eye contact across the work table, more of the particular tension that exists between two people who have reached a conclusion neither has yet stated aloud. Price arrived at the Mercier Bank on a Thursday morning in the last week of May, unannounced, carrying a leather document case and the manner of a man who has made a decision that frightens him and intends to act on it before his nerve fails. He was perhaps 55, thin and precise, with the careful bearing of a solicitor who had spent 30 years being trusted with other people's important documents. He asked for Monsieur Mercier by name, was shown to the private office, and placed the document case on Laurent's desk without preamble. "I was the Aldous family's solicitor for 11 years, he said. "I was removed from the engagement 2 months after Lord Stratton's marriage to Miss Holt. I am here because I have been carrying something that I should have brought to light 3 years ago, and I find I can no longer carry it." He opened the case and laid 2 documents side by side on Laurent's desk. The first was the marriage settlement as filed, the document that had been used to transfer Clara's dowry into the Stratton estate. The second was the original draft, the version drawn up before the final signing. Laurent looked at them in silence for a long moment. He did not need to be told what he was looking at. 3 figures in the filed version did not match the original. The differences were specific, substantial, and unambiguous. And at the bottom of the filed version, on a clause that had not existed in the original draft, a clause vesting all future inheritance in the husband's name, was Josiah Holt's signature, dated a Thursday in November. He was in Liverpool on that date. Price said quietly, "I know because I was with him. We had a meeting at the dock offices regarding the shipping contracts. He could not have been in London to sign this document. I raised the question when I noticed the date. I was told I had misremembered. A week later, I was removed from the engagement. Laurent sent for Clara immediately. She came to the bank within the hour, still in her working apron from the warehouse, and Laurent said nothing when she arrived. He simply moved aside so she could reach the desk and see both documents. She read them in silence. She read them again. She stood with both hands flat on the desk and her eyes moving between the two sets of figures with the concentrated attention of a woman reading a ledger in which she has found a very large discrepancy. The room held its quiet for a full minute. Laurent counted it, roughly, and did not interrupt it. Then Clara straightened and looked at Price. "Will you sign a sworn statement before a French notaire?" she asked him, "attesting to the date, the forgery, and the circumstances of your removal from the Aldous engagement?" "I will," Price said. "That is why I came." Clara looked at the documents once more. Something shifted in her posture. A slight squaring of the shoulders, a change in the set of her jaw, that Laurent noted with attention. "I am no longer defending," she said. "I am collecting." Laurent looked at her and understood that the legal position had reversed entirely. Crispin Aldous was no longer a husband pursuing a runaway wife and a disputed asset. He was a man exposed to a forgery prosecution in 2 jurisdictions, with a former solicitor willing to testify, and a wife who now held the original documents. The siege had turned. Lady Honoria moved on 2 fronts simultaneously, which Clara had expected, because Lady Honoria was not a stupid woman. The first was a petition in English court to remove Cecily from the guardianship of a wife who had abandoned her husband's household without cause or permission. A petition framed with considerable skill around the welfare of the child and the unfitness of a woman of unsound conduct to raise her. The second was quieter and more effective in the short term. A whisper campaign through English Paris, delivered through the network of visiting English families who passed through the city each season, which emptied Clara's salon of English custom in a fortnight. 3 buyers who had been on the point of placing orders sent polite notes of withdrawal. 2 social invitations she had accepted were followed by equally polite regrets from the hostesses. Clara calculated the damage, and then calculated something else. Continued association with Laurent Mercier's bank made him a visible target for Aldous' legal action. His house was built on aristocratic clients. If those clients were given reason to associate him with a scandal involving a runaway viscountess and a disputed English settlement, the damage to the bank would be real and lasting. She went to his office on a Friday morning. "I am removing you from my legal representation," she told him, standing in front of his desk. "I have identified a French advocate, a maître Fontaine, who has experience in commercial law and international disputes, and I will retain him from next week." Laurent set down his pen. "Clara, I am not asking your opinion," she said. "I am telling you what I have decided. The Aldous action will target anyone who stands visibly beside me, and I will not let that reach your bank. My bank is capable of managing." "Your bank," Clara said, "has been built over 14 years, client by client, on a reputation for discretion and sound judgment. I will not be the reason that reputation is questioned." She paused. "I am grateful for everything you have done. That is precisely why I am doing this." Laurent stood. He was taller than she was, and the office was not large, and the distance between them across the desk was not very great. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the banker's careful assessment, not the warmth he brought to the warehouse evenings, but something plainer and more direct than either. "You are making a decision about my situation," he said, without asking me what I think about it. "Yes," Clara said, "because if I ask you, you will argue, and you will be very persuasive, and I will be tempted to let you stay, and that would be wrong." She met his eyes. "Thank you, Laurent." She left. She walked back to the warehouse on the Rue de Richelieu, and she did not look at the ring on her finger until she was inside with the door closed behind her. And then she looked at it for a long time. That evening, Laurent opened his private ledger and wrote in his own hand, "She did it to protect the bank. She is wrong about what it costs me. I let her leave without telling her. Note this also." He wrote beneath it, "3 aristocratic clients have already withdrawn their accounts. I did not tell her. I should have told her. I did not." He closed the ledger and sat in the empty office for some time, listening to the sounds of the Rue Saint-Honoré outside the window. Cecily developed a fever the following night. It came on quickly, the way childhood fevers do. A slight warmth at bedtime, a restlessness through the small hours, and then by 2 in the morning, a burning heat and a dry, rapid breathing that brought Clara out of her own bed and into the nursery with a lamp and her hands already moving to check the child's pulse. She sent Emmeline for the nearest physician. She did not send for Laurent. She had removed him from her affairs, and she would not draw him back into them, not even now. He came anyway. He arrived at the Rue de Richelieu at 2:30 in the morning, and he brought with him a doctor, Aubert, whom he had woken from sleep, and who arrived carrying his bag with the slightly ruffled dignity of a man who has learned, in a long career, not to argue with the urgency in a banker's voice at 2 in the morning. Clara opened the door and looked at Laurent for a moment without speaking. "The doctor," Laurent said simply. "Let us in." She stepped back. Dr. Aubert examined Cecily for 10 minutes, asked Clara a series of precise questions about the onset and the child's history, and issued instructions to Emmeline regarding cold cloths, the specific timing of the fever powder he left on the nightstand, and the positioning of the child to aid her breathing. Then he told Clara he would return at dawn to assess the progress, and he left. Laurent did not leave. The 4 of them, Clara, Laurent, Emmeline, and Cecily's small still form in the narrow bed, worked through the night in the way that people work through crises, without speaking much, without getting in each other's way, with the specific efficiency of shared purpose. Emmeline changed the cloths. Clara monitored the breathing. Laurent kept the lamp trimmed and the fire built up and, at some point around 4 in the morning, brought 2 cups of tea from the kitchen without being asked. Somewhere in the small hours, when Emmeline had gone briefly to the kitchen and the room was quiet except for Cecily's breathing and the low sound of the fire, Clara and Laurent were sitting on opposite sides of the child's narrow bed. Clara's hand was resting on the coverlet near Cecily's arm. Laurent's hand was resting on the other side. At some point, neither of them could have said exactly when. Their hands met across the child and stayed there, and neither of them withdrew, and the candle on the nightstand burned steadily down. The fever broke at first light. Cecily's breathing eased, her color improved, and she opened her eyes briefly and said, in a perfectly conversational tone, "I am very thirsty," which made Emmeline burst into tears and made Clara press her free hand briefly over her mouth and close her eyes. Laurent stood and went to the window. The Seine was visible from the nursery, a gray-gold ribbon in the early light, the rooftops of the left bank just beginning to catch the sun. Clara came to stand beside him. Emmeline was settled with Cecily and the cup of water, and the room had the particular quiet of a crisis that is past. "I pushed you away to protect the bank," Clara said, "not because I wanted to, because I calculated that your continued association with me gave the Aldous solicitors a target. and I would not let them use you to reach me." She paused. "I should have told you that, rather than simply doing it." Laurent looked at the Seine. "You were not wrong about the target," he said. "But," Clara said. "But you made the decision for me," he said, without the accurate figures. He turned from the window. 3 aristocratic clients withdrew their accounts in the fortnight after you first retained me as your legal agent. Not because of anything that happened after, because of the association itself. The damage was already done before you removed me." He looked at her steadily. "I did not tell you. I should have. I let you make a sacrifice based on incomplete information, which is not something I would accept from anyone on a commercial matter. And I should not have accepted it in this." Clara went very still. She looked at him with the focused attention she brought to figures that did not add up. "You lost 3 clients," she said, "before I removed you." "Yes," he confirmed. "And you did not tell me." His voice was quiet. "No." "Why not?" Laurent was quiet for a moment. "Because I did not want you to feel that backing you had a cost," he said, "which was, I recognize, not a decision you asked me to make for you." Clara looked at him for a long time. Outside, Paris was waking. The first cart on the cobblestones below, a shutter opening somewhere on the floor above, a bird beginning in the courtyard. The light was coming through the nursery window, pale and clean and full of the specific quality of early morning. She moved to the warehouse door. They had come downstairs while they spoke, she realized, without quite noticing. And she stopped him before he could step out into the morning. "Are you certain?" she asked him. "About all of it. The clients, the association, what it costs. Are you certain?" Laurent looked at her in the early light. His coat was over his arm. He had been awake all night, and it showed, and he looked at her with an expression that had none of the banker's careful management in it. Only the plain, tired truth of a man who has stopped calculating. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," he said, "and less able to afford it." Clara kissed him. It was a single, deliberate kiss. Not impulsive, not rushed. Not the product of exhaustion or relief, but the product of a decision made somewhere in the long hours of the night. A decision she was now enacting with the same directness she brought to everything. His hand came up to her face, briefly, and when she stepped back, they were both very still for a moment in the morning light. "That is not a conclusion," she said. Laurent held her gaze. "No," he said. "It is not." The Maison Holt opened its doors on the 14th of October, in rooms on the Rue de Rivoli that had been fitted out over the preceding month with Lyon silk on the walls and good candlelight and the particular atmosphere of a place that knows exactly what it is. Clara had sent invitations to everyone of consequence in the English and French commercial communities of Paris. She had also, through a channel she did not explain to Laurent, ensured that a correspondent for a London paper would be present, and that a French magistrate of her acquaintance would attend, and that 2 of the most significant English merchants trading in Paris would be in the room. She had also, through the same channel, ensured that Crispin and Lady Honoria received invitations. She had expected them to come. She knew Crispin well enough to know that he would see the soirée as an opportunity. A room full of witnesses before whom he could publicly reclaim her assets and label her a runaway wife, which would serve both the legal action and the smear campaign in a single move. He did not disappoint her. They arrived at 9 in the evening, when the room was full, and the champagne had been circulating long enough that everyone present was in good spirits and paying attention. Crispin entered with Lady Honoria on his arm, and the particular confidence of a man who believes he holds all the cards. And he looked across the room until he found Clara, and he began moving toward her with the measured pace of a man who intends to make a scene that will be remembered. Clara did not move toward him. She waited, standing with Laurent on her right and Price on her left, near the long table she had arranged along the east wall. Crispin stopped when he saw Price, a fraction of a second, barely visible. But Clara saw it, and Laurent saw it, and the French magistrate, who was standing 3 feet away with a glass of champagne and an attentive expression, saw it too. "Clara," Crispin said, recovering smoothly, "this has gone far enough. You will come home and you will bring the child, and we will settle the matter of these French assets through proper English process." "Good evening, Crispin," Clara said. "I am glad you came. I have something to show you, and I thought it best to do it with witnesses." She turned to the table and picked up the 2 documents, the filed settlement and the original draft, and she held them out to the room, not to Crispin. "These are 2 versions of my marriage settlement," she said, in a voice pitched to carry clearly across the salon. "The filed version, which was used to transfer my father's entire settlement into the Stratton estate, and the original draft, which shows what was agreed before certain figures were altered, and a clause was added bearing my father's signature on a date when he was demonstrably in Liverpool." She paused. "Mr. Price, who drew up both documents and was dismissed from the Aldous engagement when he questioned the discrepancy, has signed a sworn statement before a French notaire. The statement is here." She set the documents on the table and passed them, one by one, to the nearest guests. The French magistrate took them first. The London correspondent took them second. The 2 English merchants leaned together over the original draft and were quiet for a moment. And then one of them looked up at Crispin, with an expression that had nothing social in it. Crispin attempted to speak. He said, "These documents are—" And then the French magistrate asked him a specific question about the date on the added clause, and he could not answer it. And he attempted another response, and the merchant asked him a specific question about the Liverpool meeting, and he could not answer that either. Lady Honoria had gone very still beside him. She was not a woman who showed fear, but she had the rigid quality of someone calculating rapidly and arriving at a number she does not like. The room was very quiet. Clara stood at the table and let the silence work. It lasted, in total, perhaps 12 minutes. The passing of the documents, the questions, the 2 failed attempts at response. It was not a dramatic scene in the way of stage melodrama. It was something quieter and more final. A room full of people watching a man discover that the ground he believed he was standing on had been, for some time, not there. Crispin turned to Clara. "What do you want?" he said. The social manner was entirely gone. He spoke to her now as one person speaks to another when the audience becomes irrelevant. "Your signature," Clara said. "Before the notaire I have waiting in the next room. You will relinquish all claim to my person, to Cecily's guardianship, and to the French stake and any income arising from it. You will sign a full release. In return, I will not press charges in either jurisdiction, and you will leave Paris on the morning coach." "Those terms," Crispin began, "are generous," Clara said. "You forged my father's signature and took 7 years of my life, and left me to be sent to the country like furniture. The terms are generous. Take them." The room waited. Lady Honoria said, very quietly, "Crispin," and the word contained a complete instruction. Crispin took the terms. The notaire was waiting in the small side room, as Clara had promised, with the release already drafted and the ink already prepared. Crispin signed it in the presence of Laurent, Price, and the French magistrate, who witnessed it with the unhurried efficiency of a man performing a routine legal act. Which was, Clara thought, exactly the right tone. Crispin left the room without looking at her again. Lady Honoria followed him, and she paused at the door for a moment. And she looked back at Clara with an expression that was not precisely regret and not precisely admiration, but was something in the territory between them. The look of a woman who had made a calculation that had failed, acknowledging the failure. Then she was gone, and the salon door closed, and the room exhaled. Laurent was beside her. He had been beside her through all of it. And she was aware of this in the way she was aware of the warmth from the fireplace. As a specific, physical fact, present and reliable. "The last of my title clients left the room," he said quietly. Before the documents were passed, he saw which side I was standing on and made his decision. Clara turned to look at him. "Tell me what the bank needs," she said. Laurent looked at her steadily. "It needs a significant commercial anchor, a first contracted account of sufficient size to demonstrate to the market that the Mercier Bank's future is in commercial trade rather than aristocratic capital. It would need to be a real figure, not a courtesy arrangement." Clara named the figure. She stated it precisely, as her father had taught her to state figures, clearly, without hedging, as a fact rather than an offer. Laurent looked at her. Then he laughed. It was a genuine laugh, unguarded, the first entirely unguarded sound she had heard him make. Not the banker's measured amusement or the careful warmth of the warehouse evenings, but something open and real, and surprised out of him. "That is significantly more than I was going to ask for," he said. "I know," Clara said. "It is what the stake can support, and it is what the bank needs, and it is what my father would have done." She paused. "Do you accept?" He answered without hesitation. "I accept." Around them, the salon was beginning to find its voice again. The particular sound of a room that has witnessed something and is now deciding what to make of it. The champagne was circulating. Price was talking to the French magistrate. The London correspondent was writing something in a small notebook with the concentrated expression of a man who knows he has a story. Clara looked at the room, at the silk on the walls, at the chandelier throwing its light across 24 faces, at the name on the printed card on the table near the door, Maison Holt, Paris. And she felt, for the first time since she had stood in the corridor at Stratton House and heard her husband pour wine for his mother, that the ground beneath her feet was entirely her own. The autumn morning came slowly, the way October mornings do in Paris. Gray first, then gold. The light arriving through the high warehouse windows in long, angled bars that caught the silk and turned it luminous. The lion looms had begun their run at first light. The sound of them, a steady, productive rhythm that carried up from the floor below to the rooms above. And on the work table in the counting room, the accounts for the first quarter of the Maison Holt's trading life were laid out in Clara's handwriting, the columns precise and the final figure considerably better than the projection. Outside the warehouse on the Rue de Richelieu, above the door that had once led to a half-empty storage space smelling of dust and old rope, the sign had been repainted the previous week. The letters were gilt on black, simple and unambiguous. Holt, the name her husband had used as a term of social embarrassment. The merchant's daughter, the trade connection, the Liverpool origins he had been so relieved to sever. The name her father had built from nothing on the Liverpool docks and carried to Lyon and left, in the end, to the only person he trusted with it. It was a name that now had a Paris address. On the work table, beside the accounts, 2 cups sat on a single tray, still warm.